to have Larry Dudley with us here this evening. And he's here to promote his brand new book, New York Station, which is for sale, so please purchase one if you haven't already, and Larry will sign it for you. The book is just being released this week, so it is literally hot off the press, we're happy to say. And it's a very evocative description of the United States in about a year and a half before the beginning of World War II, the U.S. entry into World War II, set in the summer of 1940. And those of us living in Saratoga would be interested in this book for a specific reason, because about half the book is set within Saratoga Springs, and Larry does a great job in terms of bringing to life what Saratoga Springs was like in those days. The Estates Hotel, the racetrack, casinos, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful description of that era. If you have a cell phone, if you can please turn it off, we appreciate that. And let's give Larry a warm welcome to North Star Bookstore.
Mike, thank you. Mike, thank you, and thanks to the North Star Bookstore for hosting me. This is pretty terrific, really. This is obviously my first recorded book, or first published book, so it's really a treat. It's the first time I've ever done this. I've had a lot of political meetings, as many of you know, over the years. There's a lot of my friends and Patriots in Arms here. It's great to see you all. So thank you all so much for coming out. I know it's always tough on a cold night in January, but it's great, and I so appreciate it. I've had so much support from so many people over the years, and I owe so much to so many people. But thank you all for coming. So it's kind of weird what's going on with this book. I mean, like 2 or 3 people asked me tonight, how long have I been working on this book? The answer is an awfully long time. I first got, oddly enough, thinking about this book when I was working for the Saratogian, when I was a reviewer for the Saratogian. I reviewed everything for several years out at SPOC, the ballet, the Philharmonic Orchestra, National Shakespeare Festival. We had the City Opera was in town in those days. We didn't have portable terminals or computers, so we had to drive downtown from SPOC at about 10 o'clock at night in the middle of July and August to the office right over here, the old Saratogian office, which was really hectic, and I had to file my stories to a midnight deadline, which was really hairy to get it done in that time. But I did manage to do it. And afterwards, we would have to sit around, because you can't leave the paper until the page is locked. You're not released until that, because they don't know if something doesn't fit. They got to juggle everything else, and you may have to cut. So I couldn't leave, so we all had to sit there. And I would shoot the breeze with the reporters, and we would talk and so on, and they would tell me about a lot of the old days in Saratoga and the things that went on, and also a lot of the inside dope of what was going on in town at the time, as opposed to what people were being said, which was interesting also. But very often they would get around to the old days about the bootleggers and the casinos and the gambling that went on, and all this stuff. Saratoga has an extraordinary history. I mean, I don't think it's probably a community of its size in the country, maybe the world, that has so much history and such color in it for a place of its size. And one day they came around, they told me about Riley's Lake House, which I had never heard about. And I was fascinated by this. And it still belonged, it was privately owned at that time, and was trespassing signs all over. But I went out there, and you weren't supposed to go out there. But I snuck out. I couldn't stand it. I snuck out there to take a look. And of course, you went out by Lake Lonely, and there was this long double driveway that went up to it. And there was this fountain in the front with these dolphins in it. And then there was this sprawling complex. I mean, I sort of thought it'd be like some kind of roadhouse by the side of the road, and it wasn't. It was this enormous thing, really, really big. Over on one side was a kitchen complex, then there was this huge octagonal ballroom, then you had the center of complex where there was a bar, and it was this big ziggurat-type building with this huge door in the front. Over on the side, connected by a drawbridge, was the gaming hall, which was a very long, big building. And it had all this Art Deco stuff. It reminded me of the Chrysler Building. It was just a magnificent Art Deco structure. It was an incredible thing. I snuck up and I looked in the front door, and you go up the steps and you looked in the plate glass door, and this big long silver handle. It was quite something. And when you looked in, there was this marble lobby, and there was a gazelle inlaid in onyx on the floor, and it was clearly what was a period Lalique chandelier hanging. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But it all something happened to me. It's like one of those moments of inspiration that comes to you sometimes in life, very rarely, and it's sort of precious, because I've been interested in a long time in the isolationist period, because I think it was always a question of mine, why did it take Pearl Harbor to get the United States into World War II? It was really a question, I think, and I couldn't figure this. I think it was a very hard question. It's still a very hard question, that it took so much to get the United States into it. So I became very interested in that. I was also aware, because a lot of the new histories that were coming out about World War II, those books like The Ultra Secret and some others that had come out about the secret history of World War II. It was at that point about 40 years after the war, 45 years after the war, and stuff was coming out. You know, secrets that we'd never heard about. A lot was just quite startling. For instance, like the Ultra Secret, the German Enigma machines, which the British had broken all the German codes, and no one knew about this during the war. It was like 45 years after the war before anyone even heard about this. So this is quite extraordinary. And part of this was an organization called British Security Coordination, which was based in Rockefeller Center. And they occupied eventually several floors in the International Building in Rockefeller Center. And it was a quasi-diplomatic, quasi-intelligence kind of organization. It sort of operated in the gray area. The U.S. government knew about it. It wasn't exactly legal. It wasn't exactly illegal. Everyone sort of looked the other way because, you know, that was what you did, and because the war was on and so on. And they were sent here originally. They were originally set up after the fall of France, and the idea was that if Britain fell to the Nazis, basically the plan was the government in exile would go to Canada with the royal family and whatever was left of the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, and they would fight on. Britain was not going to surrender the way the French did. They were going to go to the Empire, and they would never surrender. Churchill really meant it. They were never going to surrender. And British intelligence was going to operate out of New York City, and they were going to run resistance inside occupied Britain from New York, because the United States was a neutral country. If Britain didn't fall, and there was a very real possibility that Britain could have fallen, particularly in the summer of 1940. That was an incredibly close call. I mean, Churchill's famous saying that never have so many people owed so much to so few is quite literally true. It's easy to think that he's just gassing off like how politicians do. No, it was really true. That was like an incredible bottleneck through which civilization went. The British had lost, the Royal Air Force had lost the Battle of Britain. The Nazis and the fascist regimes would be running the world today. It would be a nightmare of horrendous proportions of what would have happened. So part of the history of British Security Coordination is that Ian Fleming was attached to it for a while. He was based here for a while in the United States. I mean, he came here quite a bit after World War II. He spent some time over in Cambridge, and he spent some time up in Bolton Landing, Sagamore. And I think the question is, how did he come to this area? How did he come to know about this area? Why here? Well, I think it was very clear. He was assigned to British Security Coordination in New York City, and he was going up and down Route 9 to Montreal and Canada, because that was the quickest route in those days to Canada. And what the British were doing is they were doing stuff. They were grabbing Nazis. They were running people up and down the road. RNCP officers were coming down into the United States. They were picking people up, and they were going with them. So, you know, this was part of the whole history of all of this. So Ian Fleming was here, and it just all came together in my mind in a big flash. Wow, here is a great story. You know, there probably were spies going up and down Route 9. You have this incredible Art Deco casino, gambling, just gangsters, just, you know, and Saratoga, which of course is it's about as great a venue for a story as you could imagine. And it all came together in my mind in this big flash. Like, man, there's a great story here. Well, I tried to write it and went on for a few years, and it was kind of tough because that was the end of the Cold War. Berlin Wall came down, Soviet Union collapsed, you know, and I think probably the most astonishing sort of moment that actually happened in our lifetimes, because I certainly never thought I'd live to see that, but it did happen. And it languished for a while. And then in 1999, new historical research came out about some more secret history of World War II. Well, that was from a historian by the name of Gerald Weinhardt, who was a professor at the University of North Carolina, who was one of the leading historians of World War II. And he was digging through the Nazi archives. Now, what happened is after the end of World War II, the U.S. Army picked up the German archives, and they brought them over here to the United States. And they're still down in a colossal warehouse somewhere in Virginia. And it's kind of a sad story because they're crumbling away. It was none of the stuff was acid-free paper, and we've got maybe 5 or 10 years to find out what's in that before it all turns to dust. which you probably will. And we're talking, you know, I mean, it's. Have you ever seen that scene at the end of the Indiana Jones movie where they go down this giant warehouse and they push the thing? That's that place. You know, there's millions of boxes of German documents because, you know, Germany was a big country. It was a massive empire for a while, and it was just a phenomenal amount of stuff. Well, what he found was that the Germans tried to intervene in the 1940 presidential election. At one point, they sent over $5 million as a slush fund to bribe people and to pay people here in the United States. We know for a fact, through research that he did and through intelligence intercepts through Mexico, that at one point the Germans spent $160,000 to bribe 39 members of the Pennsylvania delegation to the Democratic National Convention to not vote for Roosevelt. They desperately wanted to stop Roosevelt. They were really scared. Now, you have to back up and think about those numbers because it doesn't sound like, may not sound like that much today. But a brand new Spitfire, we know this because the British sold one at the same time to Finland. They sold a squadron worth of Spitfires to Finland for $52,000. So that $5 million would have bought 100 Spitfire fighter planes for the British, or for the British if they'd had that money. It also a new naval destroyer like the one down here in Albany cost about $1 million a piece to build a ship like that. So this was an enormous sum of money. I mean, 100 planes a fighter wing. It's not just a squadron; it's a whole fighter wing. It's a lot of people. So they had this huge slush fund. At one point, we know for a fact that Hans Thomson, the German charge d'affaires, who was the top German diplomat in the United States, based in Washington Embassy, asked Berlin for permission to stop keeping records of how he was spending the money, and it was granted. It was granted. Well, I mean, why? Why did the Nazis give him permission to not keep records? Well, they knew full well this was an act of war. This was a profound act of war. After all, only a couple of years earlier, they had rigged a plebiscite in Austria to approve the Anschluss, which was not really voluntary. Did the Austrian people really want that? Who knows? You know, but they never really got to decide it. It was just sort of imposed on them, and Germany took over Austria. They probably would have approved it, but we don't know. They still rigged the election, and they, of course, didn't exactly play fair. They had phony elections in Germany, so it was something that they were used to doing. So, you know, I mean, they were here really a serious way, trying to stop Roosevelt. Why did they want to do that? Well, there would be two reasons why they want to do it. Either they would just generate enough confusion and resistance here in the United States that Roosevelt couldn't help Britain prior to the election, or even better, if he could lose, then you'd have a very long transition to a new and completely green president. Inauguration day in those days wasn't in January; it was in March. There was a long transition, you know, during which the United States would basically be paralyzed. And that's what they wanted, because they knew, you know, they needed to keep the United States out of the war. So this basically provoked a major rewrite, and I tried to sell it, and it went on for a little while. I think maybe the moment wasn't right. Well, what happened is when 2016, about February, March, Donald Trump decides to run for president. He starts talking about America first. Well, that was like a pretty startling sort of comment, and I thought, my God, maybe there's a chance for this again. So I sent the whole thing out basically to an agent. I got one right away this time. I had really good agents before, and they weren't able to sell it. But I got the agent right away, and it didn't sell until after the election. But after the election was over, we did another quick rewrite on it, and then it did sell, and it sold pretty quickly then. So that was almost exactly a year ago now. So Blackstone Publishing put it out. They were the publisher. They're based in Ashland, Oregon. They actually moved this out pretty quickly. It's hard to get a book out. You can do a hardcover book or major book like this in 6 months, but generally that means cutting a lot of corners you probably don't want to cut. So they got the books out there, and it went into the, you know, basically here it is in the North Shore Bookstore, stores across the country. So they were Mike tells me. Mike and Gail tells me actually they were really rushing it out because they're a little bit late even getting to them, because I think they were pushing on at the last minute and got it out here. So it's really it's been a wild ride. As the Grateful Dead say, what a long, strange trip it's been. And it really is true. And here we are. So it's great. It's really great. And So I appreciate all of you being here, but that's